All right, and without further ado, let's do this. Yo, welcome to Seb One's Music Corner. I am DJ Seb One, laptop family motivated on precision towards outstanding performance. And in today's episode of Seb One's Music Corner, what we're going to talk about is something that a lot of DJs starting out have questions about. And very simply, that question is, should I buy a laptop? Now, the first thing that you have to understand is that if you decide you want to buy a laptop and you're not going down the USB route, that you need to consider, well, you really only have two choices. You either buy a Mac unit or you buy a PC unit. Now, this doesn't include things like iPads, Android tablets. We're talking about fully fledged computers, and I know some of the IT savvy among you are more like, yeah, but the M1, M2 RISC processors aren't technically, full traditional CPU units. You know what I mean? We're basically arguing, should you, or examining, do you want to get a Mac or a PC? Now, there's a couple of things to understand when we're doing this. And the first thing you need to understand is that basically how the considerations, for why you get a laptop. The first thing is performance. So we have the performance. So for the gamers out there, it would be the same, similar, making sure that it runs well. Now, when it comes to performance in a laptop, when it comes to DJing, what you're really looking for is minimal latency. So, latency, lag, delay, that sort of thing, which is basically the time between you doing something, say pressing a button or moving a fader, excuse me, or anything of similar sort of such thing, and then that change happening and then being heard throughout the speakers. So there's latency. Then there's also another thing to think about is the user experience, the UX. Obviously, latency is a big part of that. Things like, both of these, if the latency is too little, you'll have things like audio dropouts, and a whole bunch of very different sort of, issues. And if you ever got on the Serato forums or any sort of like Reddit threads, subreddits, you'll see that there's many DJs asking, I've got problems with this, that, and the third. Now, before we talk about Windows or Mac, you really need to look at the options on the market. So basically, you have your, if I split this down the middle, you have your hardware, that's the actual thing, and then you have your software. So that's the app for the more modern people. Now, what that basically means is you have a couple of choices. Again, we're only talking about laptops, not so much tablets, but you have Virtual DJ. You have, virtual DJ, algorithm DJ, Serato, and Traktor. So you've basically got these four options. So here is the dilemma or the problem you will face. Pick from one of these two and then pick from one of these four. We're gonna go over each and every one of these issues, and then I'm going to specifically talk about this. The reason that I'm going to talk about this and not these is because Virtual DJ, Algorithm DJ, and Traktor, they have moved to what is more sort of like, not so much open, but in a sense it can be called a sort of open system where you can hook up anything and everything as long as you map the controls to the software. Now, I'm going to assume that for the purposes of this Music Corner today, that you're probably going to be a DJ who's, while you may, even if you know things like, IT, or you've had some, like recording studio experience working with a DAW, maybe you've used some Ableton, maybe you've used some Pro Tools. When it comes to DJing, there's a lot of things that, there's enough on your plate to deal with, like, finding music, preparing your sets, practicing your little trick routines, or figuring out which songs go with which, things like that you don't necessarily, want to have to spend the same amount of time you spent mapping your audio interface, your recording studio interface to your DAW, right? You want to plug and play. And I think that brings us to a very important point. What are the goals of such a system? So, I know a lot of people joke about, the USB people, but if you really think about it, they've prepared all their stuff on, say, Rekordbox or whatever, and they come in and they plug it into the Pioneer system and it just works. Unless, of course, the USB is corrupt, in which case that's another problem altogether. But, I mean, we can't cover the scope of everything. It's not possible to, do all that into a short video and still keep it relatively short. So the goals, we want low latency, because, if you happen to have, we'll talk about that later, low latency. We also want stability, and we also want ease of use. It shouldn't be hard to get it up and running. Now, keeping these goals in mind when it comes to picking your equipment, it's very easy to potentially argue the case for things that, whether it be, a mixer or a controller, excuse me, or any of these, sort of, all the things on the market today, having this hardware natively mapped to the software. So, for example, when you plug in a 72 Mark II or a Pioneer S11 or something like one of the many controls in the market that are made for Serato or Virtual DJ or Algorithm DJ ready, when you plug it in, everything is already good to go. And so, for example, if I press this red button here, that will take me to Q.1. Right? So there's a lot to be said for having a closed system. The reason why today I want to focus on Serato in particular is because with Traktor, Algorithm DJ, Virtual DJ, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do in terms of mapping the audio, where the sound goes, and which button does what, that gets into a very difficult discussion beyond the scope of what should I buy. So we're only going to look at it in terms of Serato today, because Serato in that sense still has a rather closed system. Manufacturers, companies that make the gear, make sure it's ready for Serato and it all comes integrated. And you could probably also argue that is the case for a lot of the Pioneer units when it comes to Pioneer and Serato or Pioneer and Rekordbox. So, of course, probably should write that down. Rekordbox. Now, again, I just want to repeat that today's discussion is only on the hardware side of things, not so much the software side of things. This can be a discussion for another day, but this is primarily a discussion today because this costs money. And that is the, ultimately, that is the thing that we're trying to achieve with today's Seb One's Music Corner discussion. Now, on to the next. Mac PC. Ease of use. Arguably, Mac and PC ease of use when it comes to, say for example, let's say you're fortunate enough to have a PC or a laptop that's a Mac or a PC, and you just use it for DJing, because that is always best practice. These days, when it comes to Windows and Mac, OS X, it's the same. You log in, you type in your passwords, you do all that, and then you open the Serato app or the Serato program on Windows, and then you're in Serato. So, assuming that it's for the same, just for DJing only, you're not trying to run your business or whatever on that computer, arguably it's equal. And again, because you're just using that laptop for music, stability-wise, as long as you follow Serato's best practices, they're both relatively stable. So the real question, then going back to the Mac PC thing, largely boils down to performance and also money. So we're going to go through those things. Now, this is where, again, so I'll just say it out loud right now in the video. If you have the money, you care about all these three things, the answer is very simple. Buy a Mac. However, if you don't have the money, but you want to have similar expectations, buy the PC. Because the one thing that has been left out here, and this is something that I'll also touch again later in this video, is the question of storage. In other words, your music. So, let's first talk about the big elephant in the room, latency. And for us to discuss latency, we actually need to know about how Serato handles latency in audio. So this is a mixer. This is, an audio interface. So obviously sound comes in, sound comes out. When it comes to the Mac side of things, the very, very simple version, and again, this is a video on hardware, not on audio signal flow when it comes to audio interfaces. Mac has a thing called Core Audio. And basically, and also you may have heard also something additionally, which is not limited, called Class Compliant. Now, basically what that means is that for a lot of audio interfaces, especially when it comes to DJ mixers and consoles and things like that, it is literally just plug and play. Very simple. Because Apple tightly regulates its hardware and its architecture and the design specs, blah, 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 blah. while there may be devices with drivers, these days the drivers are more concerned with things like, making sure that the MIDI buttons and all of that stuff works. Serato itself has drivers inside the program. So if you hook up a unit, Serato will detect that, and then you may have seen it before in the bottom right. It says, "Hey, new drivers available. Please install," and then you do it. But largely, Serato, and this goes also to stability. Serato's latency slider, the 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, that only controls the Serato side of the software latency. So remember, there's always going to be hardware latency and software latency. So you're always, in any situation, you're always going to get the hardware. So say, for example, this is the mixer. It's a really bad mixer, but you're always going to get the latency here, plus the latency through the USB interface into your laptop. And this is, so there's the internal, how long it takes it to process in here, because these mixers these days are all digital and not analog. Then it has to go in that way. The computer has to do stuff in the program. Then it has to come back out this way. Then it has to go out to the speakers. So it's a bit of a long and complicated round trip. Now, when you use Mac and Apple, it only lets you adjust the latency for Serato in the sliders. Many years ago, Rain, for example, used to give you an option to adjust the latency of the audio interface bit. And many people automatically did this thing where they just moved it all the way down to the lowest, and then the Serato forums was filled with people with complaints because their gear suddenly wasn't working for gigs, and there was like pops and crackles and audio dropouts. Then on PC, it gets more complicated, because on PC, on Windows, basically everything needs a driver. That's the same with Mac. However, a lot of times, because Mac, like when you get a Mac, everything's all like preset. It comes preloaded with the drivers. When you buy a PC, it doesn't come with a Rain 72. When it comes to audio interfaces and devices, what happens is normally each mixer has its own driver, and in the driver is a control panel. And in this control panel, you get to set the latency of the hardware, the audio interface. Then on top of that, you also have the Serato app latency, which that's the one you access in the control panel. And the driver itself is usually a custom affair. So if you've done any sort of studio recording work, you would have seen this thing called, ASIO drivers, which are some low latency drivers that, are used for sound recording for Windows. Also for Mac as well, but within the PC side of things, ASIO drivers are usually the sort of go-to for audio interfaces. Now, you can sort of see that here we have one, here we have two. So there's already complexity involved in, the PC side of things, where you have to like manage and optimize one more thing. And what happens is that you'll basically very quickly realize that in terms of low latency and stability, which go hand in hand, it's simply much easier in the Mac to plug and play. Historically, back in the day, there was a problem with the UX in Serato where the animated graphics for the wheels, like for the jog wheels and the displays and stuff, were always a bit jerky. No matter, if you had a gaming laptop or just a regular office laptop. And this had something to do with the coding of the Serato application on Windows. And basically, so if you care about how nice your Serato app looked back in the day, you would always buy a Mac, because even if you set the Serato app on Windows to perform at its highest refresh rate, it would still always look a bit jittery, whereas on the Mac it was just simply very smooth and it was just nice to look at. Now comes, probably for most DJs, the biggest issue: storage. If you buy a MacBook Pro, and you should always buy a MacBook Pro, because with MacBooks, remember, the external case and also parts of the inside are heat sinks, and when these computers are being used at their limit, they generate a lot of heat. A MacBook Air is smaller than a MacBook Pro, therefore less area to disperse the heat. Now, in saying that doesn't mean you go and buy the 16-inch or the whatever it is now, super hardcore MacBook Pro. The slightly smaller one can also work, but the point is, don't buy the Air, buy the Pro. However, the biggest factor that will affect your decision is storage space, because remember, if you go online and look up what a 2 terabyte MacBook is, or a 3 terabyte or a 4 terabyte or a 6 terabyte MacBook is, that cost is quite substantial. And the simple fact is that for the same amount of money, right, not even the same amount of money, a lot of the modern laptops today, because they know, the gaming companies know you're going to want to put your 2 terabyte Call of Duty install on the laptop. A lot of the gaming laptops inside, in the bottom, are always going to have an extra slot for those NVMe, or even an extra 2.5 inch SSD space. Now, some of you who have been in the DJ game for a minute will remember the days when the old MacBooks used to take out the CD slot and then you put another hard drive in to increase the storage space. And then obviously Apple got rid of that, and they, put everything, soldered onto the motherboard, so you had no choice but to buy it straight off and you couldn't upgrade. Well, with PCs, especially with the enthusiast gaming PCs and the enthusiast PCs and the power users, that never went away. So given the relatively low cost of storage drives and NVMe drives, it's very easy to accumulate a large amount of storage for your high performance storage for your music. Now, you might say, oh, I don't have enough music to fill 1 terabyte. Or, there might also be the, I pay for streaming services, which means I don't need the space. Now, the argument with that is that if you're in America, absolutely, if you have things like Google Fiber, if you have 5G, if you have the latest and greatest, that's wonderful. What if you're not in America? What if you're in another country? What if you're overseas touring? What if one day, for example, right now, when you go overseas, and you try and use your credit card for something, and then your credit card gets blocked because the bank's, AI or automatic algorithms thinks that, you shouldn't be in another country buying some random thing, and then locks your credit card. What happens one day when the streaming services implement that sort of, lock or protection or guard against their music? You never know. So, as a general best practice, it's always better to have a copy of the music, to first of all buy the music, but also to have a copy of the music on your computer, just in case the authentication or the credentials or whatever you use to gain access to your streaming service don't work. Maybe you got hacked. it would be very irresponsible of anybody to simply not be prepared for a gig, right? So therefore, having a copy of your music is very important. Now, if you went the Mac route, you would literally be paying, I think at last glance it was something like $5,000-6,000 US, which is obviously a lot more for example, where I'm in Australia, just to be able to have, a 3-4 terabyte drive. And again, you got to remember, 2-3 terabytes in today's storage and requirements isn't actually a lot anymore. So you're paying a premium for Apple, for the MacBook, for the ease of use. But you're also paying an extreme premium, which if you use that money for a PC, you would probably have enough money left over to still buy something like a Pioneer Rev 7, a Rain 1, or even, one of these Rain 72s or the Pioneer S11. That is now today, in 2024 market economy, how big of a gap the power users and the regular sort of MacBook users are. There is a very large price to be paid if you wish to have that capability when it comes to the Mac side, but not the PC side. Now, full disclaimer, I use a Mac, a 2017 Mac, which is now obsolete. There are no further Mac OS updates for it. It has 2 terabytes of storage. I have currently used about half of it with, video files and photos and music. But my previous Mac, which was a 2012 Mac, I literally used since 2013. And I made the swap for the CD drive. And I would have kept using it if it weren't for the fact that it doesn't really run stems well. And today's Serato program is getting more and more demanding, and I need an upgrade. Having said that, moving forward, if I were to need another laptop after this, I would most likely move back to PC, simply because the cost of acquiring a MacBook that is suitable for my use is just too great. Now, obviously, everybody's everybody's needs and everybody's budget and everybody's requirements are different, but that is in itself the general guide to whether or not you should get a Mac and PC. So once again, just to recap, if you definitely need a laptop and you're not planning on using USBs, and money is no object because you have the money and you want the best performance and the best ease of use and the best stability, etc., get a MacBook Pro. If you have the performance requirements, you are not ready to spend that kind of money because you simply don't have it, but you are willing to put in the time to fiddle with 1 or 2 controls and sliders and test to make sure things are stable, get a gaming laptop. Or a gaming laptop or what they call a mobile workstation, which is what they use for, CAD, 3D graphic work, mobile video editing. Get one of those. That's what you should be getting. So the reason why you overspec your computer is because you want your computer to be lazy as possible. That way, that also ensures stability. So for example, for those of us who drive and have cars, a very big V8, V10 toddling along at 1,200 RPM is a lot more stable and a lot less stressed than a tiny 1.3 liter trying to haul its passenger load at 3,000, 4,000 RPM. Right? So you want it to have enough performance overhead to be stable. In future, we'll probably talk about, all the different possible, combinations. We can talk about, how to make the best of the hardware. But right now, I think that this is a very important thing, because after the after the collecting music and paying for the music, and also purchasing your DJ equipment of choice, comes the laptop, your music storage. Even the USB users still need a laptop to store most of their music and also prepare it in Rekordbox, for example. So a laptop or some sort of mobile computing system will always be part of the equation for the near future. I hope that's helped. This is Seb One's Music Corner. Peace.